This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
It's the Blood Red podcast courtesy of the Liverpool Echo here on the Blood Red channel with Sadio Mane against Chelsea and Fabinho Fab alongside Van Dijk at the Bridge. Could things get hotter still in the transfer market for the Reds? Or does the deal for Diogo mean it's more of a no-go for Kloppo? I'm Guy Clarke. Welcome as we look back on a remarkable weekend. Signings galore, goals galore, a happy time for the Reds. Alongside me, three men with beaming smiles this Monday afternoon, covering transfer sagas, whirlwind dealings, and a trip to Chelsea and back, but still with enough in the tank to pod. It's our Liverpool correspondent, Gorsty. How are we?
I'm very good, actually, Guy. Yeah, thanks. It was a late one last night. I think I got home about 1:30. So the powers that be were on this podcast with me said that I could start at 10. So got a little extra hours kip in there, and I'm refreshed and ready to go again.
Yeah, it's very generous. On the other side of that, he's had a week off, unwinding and watching on as everything's played out, but wasn't going to miss out on dissecting a dismantling of Chelsea. Joe Rimmer, how are we?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, a little week off. Went down to Bath the first time. So James Pearce country.
Statue of James Pearce as you enter
the
city.
Seeing all the big sites, the Roman baths and James. Yeah. So it was great. Yeah, really good week and. Yeah, not nice quiet one for me to take off as well.
Yeah, it certainly was. And finally, with reasoning and versatility, whether it's sitting in the big chair and taking in what those around are saying, or coming in with his own assured views, it's our very own answer to Fabinho. Sean Bradbury. Sean, how are we?
Not bad, mate. Yeah, survived Thiago Friday and Diogo Jota Saturday. I think it's Guy Clarke Monday after that introduction. 10 out of 10 for that, mate.
No, not a problem. We've got plenty of places to go. We best start, I suppose, at Stamford Bridge. We'll get on to Liverpool's transfer dealings and whether or not there might be anything left to come. But Gorsty, we'll start with you. You were down at Stamford Bridge and that performance, I suppose Jurgen Klopp couldn't really have asked for any more after the week he had in the transfer market.
Yeah, perfect, wasn't it? I think Jurgen Klopp said it wasn't being... If Jordan Henderson isn't injured, obviously come off a half-time with a bit of a thigh problem, but if it's not a serious one, then it's been the perfect day, and I think it pretty much capped off a perfect week, didn't it, for Liverpool, with the signings of Diogo Jota and the big one, Thiago Alcantara, the one that they all wanted. Went to Chelsea, put in a really good performance. I expected a little bit more of Chelsea, if I'm honest, but Liverpool took full advantage of that man extra that they had for the second half and come out of what's probably one of the going to be maybe, let's say, probably the second toughest away venue this season with maximum points. So, as Klopp said, it was perfect.
Yeah, Joe, last time we all had eyes on Stamford Bridge, it was when Liverpool, of course, came Premier League champions, and it really was a performance of champions down at the Bridge.
It was, yeah. For me, with Chelsea's recent history, it still is a lot to get your head around to watch a Chelsea team play that defensively against Liverpool, especially at the Bridge. And, I think it spoke volumes about, what Chelsea think of Liverpool, that they set up that defensively. And the signing spree that they've been on this summer, I thought after watching Liverpool against Leeds and some of the vulnerabilities that Liverpool showed against Leeds, Chelsea would come out and have a go. And they went so defensively. I mean, it was the sort of thing you expect from teams in the bottom half of the table, to set up, 10 men behind the ball, digging in and just looking for out balls every now and again. But it was bizarre to see, and Liverpool just absolutely bossed it. And as soon as that Jordan Henderson played that brilliant pass over the top to Mane, and the sending off happened. I mean, first of all, I couldn't believe it was a yellow card to begin with. I thought it was the most clear red card you'll ever see. But luckily, thank God for VAR and for common sense coming through there, and he got the red card. And then after that, Liverpool just turned the screw, and it was so professional. It was really, really... We've seen the two sides to Liverpool, haven't we, in these last couple of weeks? A chaotic game the week before, and Liverpool will always score more than you, and then a more controlled game yesterday. And it was great to see. Sadio Mane was brilliant, and there were great performances right across. Fabinho, awesome at centre half, and I thought Jordan Henderson had a great first half, and Thiago had a great second half. So between them, they both showed what they could do, and Mane. Salah had a quiet game this week, it was brilliant last week, and Mane had a quiet game last week and was brilliant this week. So, yeah, just a brilliant performance. But still reeling about Chelsea's defensive attitude. But I think that just says everything about Liverpool right now. You don't I'm pretty sure Arsenal will set up next week and be quite similar. Teams just don't go at Liverpool. So Leeds were the exceptions to that rule at the moment.
Yeah, they definitely were in that case. And I suppose looking at the game, Sean, everybody sort of quick to say outside of, I suppose, the Liverpool bubble, well, Liverpool were against 10 men. Kepa gave the ball away. It was a silly mistake. But I suppose the key point is Liverpool forced those errors from Chelsea, whether it be the red card or the error from Kepa.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it was, on the face of it, the turning point in the game. But I think Liverpool had enough of a foothold in the first half to expect them to come out in the second half and at least get one, maybe get two. And I did think at halftime that they'd win the game, and even before the sending off. But just to pick up on what Joe said, I totally agree on Chelsea, and I did find it strange because even last season under Lampard there was an intensity to them. They had a go at Liverpool, they attacked Liverpool, and all right, whilst the FA Cup went their way and most of the other games didn't, it was strange to see what happened. And I suppose it kind of proves that maybe he's a little bit of a product of his environment, because before and during and after the game, I got kind of distinct Mourinho vibes from him. Like the way they set up, as Joe said, the amount of players behind the ball, the way they were dropping off Liverpool. Maybe it's understandable to a certain extent, given the new signings are still settling in and he's figuring out where Havertz and Werner both fit in and how you accommodate the two of them. But yeah, it was bizarre. It was strange. I think you're not going to get a result against Liverpool at home unless you have a go at them. It just, that pretty much stands for any side. And then after the match as well, I thought he didn't quite throw Kepa under the bus to the extent that Jose would have done. I think it would have been a bit more brutal if Mourinho was speaking after that match. But then he tried to deflect it all onto him and, kind of focused on his mistake a little bit. It was an error, of course, but I did think that was a little bit from the Mourinho school of going about your business from Lampard. But yeah, just in general, absolutely delighted with that. I think it was a huge victory in the context of the season and at the time of the season. These first two games, Leeds and Chelsea, for me, have been imbued really with much more significance than virtually anything since lockdown. I mean, I think we all knew Liverpool were going to canter to the title, weren't they? It was just a matter of when it got wrapped up. But the fact that they've come back this season, got off to a good start, albeit a little bit shaky against Leeds with pretty much all their shots on target going in. This was great. A clean sheet had been kept under a little bit of adversity, obviously with issues that we'll come on to in terms of injuries at the back. But just absolutely delighted with it, and there's so much to take from the game.
Just jump in there from Sean's point. I absolutely loved Frank Lampard's post-match interview where he basically said, if Liverpool hadn't scored the second goal and we'd have scored our penalty or taken more chances, it could have been 1-1 or even 2-1 to us. Like, oh, nice one, Frank. So basically, if they didn't score and we'd have won the game. It was just the equivalent of saying, my auntie's got my uncle, isn't it? It was absolute madness. I couldn't believe he said that after setting up so defensively, and then watching that. He was saying, I was pleased with it. They barely created any opportunities. I thought he did go a little bit Mourinho and start, the Kepa thing. He was obviously fuming with him. And I quite like Lampard, but I think he's been very, very spiky as of late. I think he's well aware of the money he's spent and the pressure that he's under. And I always find pre-season quite bizarre because signings, obviously, we all know change everything, don't they? And I've seen so many people getting so overexcited about the signings being made elsewhere. And, you see the predicted tables. I've seen a few people put Man United top. Just, what is this madness? And Chelsea, because they've spent money on players who, I'm sure they're all very good players, but people saying, Chelsea could have a real go and perhaps overtake Liverpool. Well, why would you place your faith in like a Kai Havertz, who I'm sure is a good player, but Mohamed Salah has done it for 4 seasons now, or 3 seasons now in the Premier League. Same for Sadio Mane, same for Roberto Firmino. They've made signings, but there's a long, long way for them to go, and that's why I think Man City will be the main challengers because they've been there and done it before. But Chelsea, they've made a lot of signings, but we don't even know whether their manager is really up to scratch just yet. He's only had 2 proper seasons, hasn't he? So, there's a lot of unknown with them. But yeah, love Frank Lampard's. If we hadn't conceded and we'd scored instead, we'd have won the game. Yep, good one, Frank.
Yeah, don't worry, Joe. We'll put the centre in as well, so our listeners in Qatar can enjoy this podcast. But
is that? Well, I wasn't sure on that one. I didn't think.
No, that's a red flag. That one.
Yeah, I think that's borderline. Yeah,
because you know the 2 or 3 big ones, don't the F's, the S's, and certainly the C's, but not. Yeah, I didn't know about the B, so fair enough.
Put it this way. If that was on the website, I'd be getting the asterisk out.
Yeah, no, I suppose I would too. So yeah, sorry about that. Sorry, Qatar.
not a problem whatsoever. Gorsty, Joe mentioned him there, Sadio Mane, and I just wondered if he's beginning to fall into that Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk bracket of even when he comes up with a brace at Stamford Bridge and has such a great game that no one's really talking about it. You sort of just seem to expect it, I suppose, because he's a world-class talent.
He is. He's obviously one of Liverpool's main men, isn't he? But there's so many of them these days that Liverpool have just got an absolute team. Certainly the best team, the best Liverpool team I've ever seen, and I'm 33 in a couple of weeks. So I think just fans need to just absolutely savour every minute that they can to watch this team in action. And as Joe mentions there, it's almost like what's unknown is more kind of sexy than what is known, in terms of like Chelsea are going to be better than Liverpool because they've signed this, that, and the other, and they've spent a bit of money. But as Joe says, Liverpool players have been there before and they've done it before. And I actually wrote in my match fair that there's a lot to be said for the cohesion and the continuity of the squad. And Mane is obviously one of the big parts of that. No surprise to see him starting again yesterday. I thought he was a bit quiet against Leeds and he was quiet particularly first half, but he sprung into life, didn't he, in injury time. He helped get Andreas Christensen sent off and then put Chelsea to the sword at 2 goals. So Liverpool is just absolutely littered with world-class talent, and he's right up there, no question. Him and Salah once again are going to be the main men as far as getting the goals for Liverpool and to the rest of the world. It's the reason they finished 4th and 5th in last year's Ballon d'Or.
Yeah, they are fantastic players. And Mane, I suppose, didn't take many of the headlines, Sean. They were reserved for Fabinho playing at centre-half, and mentioned before already how defensive Chelsea were. The plan seemed to be isolate Fabinho against Timo Werner, and it certainly didn't play out that way for Chelsea. Fabinho was brilliant.
Absolutely. When I saw the lineup drop, I was just trying to work it out, really. And then obviously the part of the answer was that Gomez and Matip didn't even make the squad. So that's quite a significant thing. But we talked on pods before about Fabinho in this position. And I have to say, I'm slightly reassessing my view on it, because I've always thought you don't want him at centre-back. Klopp has spoken about him being the emergency option almost. I think that's pretty much the word he's used. But you don't want him there. You don't really want to see him there because he's such a good defensive midfielder. But I think that the signing of Thiago and perhaps the next route of development for this Liverpool team is attacking through central areas, finding ways to support fullbacks and the wide forwards, and having some more creative threat through the middle. And first of all, I think he's, because he is a midfielder, he can step out from the back, and he did that several times. Just strode forward into midfield, changed the picture a little bit, found a really nice lofted pass, or fizz one forward to the lads up front, and that side of his game was really impressive. But you have to hand it to him, and as you say, there was plenty of battles with Werner, be they for pace or having to show strength and outmuscle him, and he pretty much won every single one. Again, with Werner still developing and finding his feet in the Premier League and in Chelsea's team, but Fabinho's only played at centre back for Liverpool a handful of times, and I honestly think if you'd silhouetted all the players and you didn't know who was who, and you'd never watched these teams play, and you were told there's a 75 million centre half out there's every chance you'd have gone, oh, it's that big bull fella there, not the guy next to him. He was that good. He was tackling. He was intercepting. He was just doing it all. So I do genuinely think now that it could have solved a bit of a transfer dilemma for the boss. I still think with Keanu Hoover leaving, there is a bit of a deficiency. Just because as well, and it's not a slight on the players, but we do quite often see Matip and Gomez out, don't we, for short periods with certain injuries. Matip's got a muscle complaint at the moment that's going to keep him out for a few weeks into the season. So yeah, I'd still go shopping for another centre back, but the idea of seeing Fabinho there a bit more would not worry me as much as it would have done a few weeks ago.
Yeah, we'll get into the transfer window in the second half of the pod. But Joe, looking at the performance of Fabinho, and as Sean said it there, are we now almost reassessing the view on him being that fourth option at centre half? I think a lot of us thought against lower mid-table sides he'd be a good option to have in there, but he's done it now against the top six rival and a side who, as you said before, a lot of people are tipping to actually challenge Liverpool this season.
Yeah, I think so. It's difficult, isn't it? Because I think, we must we always see Fabinho as a defensive midfielder because that's what we're used to. But as Sean said, watching that and taking away what you know about the player, he played very, very well. So, I think he's played there a handful of times. He played there against Bayern Munich, didn't he, in the Champions League a couple of years back? Played very, very well then. And then did he play against Wolves in the FA Cup? And I know they lost there, but I seem to remember him playing quite well that night as well. So, he has played there before, and he's played there well. So, I suppose only time will tell. It's quite difficult now to say, they don't need a centre half. He's great because, he might play there for 6 more games, and hindsight could make you look a bit silly. But he played there for so well. I think he took the things that he's good at in midfield and applied them to the defence, and he stepped up well, passed the ball well. And then he's very good in one-on-ones. So every time he seemed to be isolated, he seemed to wait and win the ball at the right time. And then he can head a ball. I think he's very good in the air. So that's given him an advantage as well. So, I think Klopp will know, and I think Klopp knows all about him and will have tried it a lot in training. So, this isn't just a case of, we'll lash him there and see how he does. It's Klopp with a plan. And he obviously has seen enough in Fabinho and potentially thought, well, if we get Thiago in, then I can move things around and play him there more often. I suppose the flip side of it is if they do get a long-term injury to the two centre-halves, Matip and Gomez, and you're dealing with Fabinho playing there for a long time, then you lose what he does bring to midfield. And that might not potentially be good. But, yeah, for now, they look all right, don't they? Yeah, I think for Klopp, I wonder whether he's looking at it and going, is there any point in bringing in a Clavan-type player, a cheaper, sort of older centre-half, for a limited amount of time when, I'm sure Gorsty's spoken about them before, but they've scouted people like that, Ben White. And, if you're going to spend the money in the longer term, perhaps someone like him is a longer-term target. So, Fabinho might be a very good option for the next 6 months to a year, and then they'll probably reassess that further down the line. But Liverpool seem to have decent options in the middle and in defence at the moment, so no complaints.
Yeah, Gorst, I suppose one of the biggest compliments, and everyone was gushing about Fabinho after the game, was him obviously allowed Thiago to play in that number 6 role. But the fact that he looked really as though he'd been paired with Van Dijk for years and years, rather than maybe the 5th or 6th time he's had a run out from the start at centre-back.
Yeah, well, he's a very intelligent footballer, isn't he? If he's playing as a defensive midfielder, you're raving about him as one of the best in the Premier League there. So it's not going to be he's not going to be a fish out of water if he's asked to drop 10, 15 yards back with Van Dijk. But for me, I still think that Joel Matip is a big concern. I think he picks up far too many injuries. So even allowing for Fabinho's excellent performance, that might have eased a few concerns about him playing there on a regular basis. I still think Liverpool are probably a centre-back light for this season, and I do think that there is scope for someone to come in who's a little bit more experienced, a little bit cheaper, and someone who can, play there for 10 or 15 games this season, and then you can kind of assess it next season if the financial constraints are kind of lifted and you do have a little bit of a more expansive budget. Someone like, as Joe said, Ben White, who did the scouts quite a lot last season.
Yeah, certainly. Come back to you, Gorsty, on Thiago. We'll go around and give our thoughts on him. I think the statistic going around was that he completed more passes than any player who's played a maximum of 45 minutes has since Opta have been recording Premier League statistics. I think they're into their 17th season now of doing it. Gorsty, just how impressed were you with Thiago?
To an extent. He's a top player, isn't he? We all know that. I mean, I think we're not making any judgments off 45 minutes against 10 men. He's a world-class midfielder who's proven it at Barcelona and Bayern Munich. So I am excited to find out what he's going to be like over the long-term course of his Liverpool contract. But I think playing against 10 men suited him, didn't it, for 45 minutes. It allowed him to kind of dictate the play, and it was fascinating to watch him. So I'm so excited to watch him over the coming seasons. And He is an elite level midfielder, and I don't think any kind of judgments can be made from yesterday either way. But from what we've seen of him across the course of his career, he's going to be some addition at Liverpool.
Yeah, and Sean, everyone was sort of raving all summer about him arriving at Liverpool. He put in a classy display in the midfield, but he did give away a penalty, perhaps the only blot on his copybook.
Yeah, I thought he was a little bit unlucky there. I think it was a pen, but it wasn't a kind of malicious foul. He kind of caught Werner with his knee, didn't he? And didn't really mean to foul him, if that makes sense. But I think Doyle in his player ratings, despite that, and despite him only playing for 45 minutes, still gave him 8 out of 10. And I'd very much be in the same ballpark. I was hugely impressed. I love a debut where a player comes on and just shows you exactly what they're all about. Probably my favourite debut ever is Dirk Kuyt. When he came on, I think it was against West Ham, and just ran around like a madman and had a shot from wherever he was on the pitch, basically. And I just thought, oh, that'll do. And, it showed what he was going to do for Liverpool for the next few seasons in terms of his work ethic and that type of thing. And yeah, it was quite telling with what Klopp said before the game. We knew that on Friday, obviously, that Thiago was signed in time and he was eligible to play. We obviously did the story saying, could make a surprise debut, but then there he was on the bench. But before the game, Klopp was saying, there's no chance that he would have played, and he was surprised to see any suggestions that would be the case. But then the circumstances of the game, obviously with the red card, changed. And afterwards, I was thinking, that was perfect, really, wasn't it, for Thiago? Because he could come on and it was almost like a bit of a training session, and you could get him some minutes that perhaps would have been unexpected. Well, they obviously were unexpected, judged by Klopp's comments. But then having thought about it, watched it more and read about it more, it wasn't a training match, really, until Liverpool were 2-0 up and cruising, was it? And I think even in those first 5 or 10 minutes when the goals went in, watching it back and seeing all the passes he completed, how he started dictating the pace and tempo of the game, having never played or even really trained for Liverpool before. It was just so impressive. I think in Gorst's verdict, he mentioned the David Xabi Alonso and how Thiago could potentially be the heir apparent to his passing throne. And it was that, for me, it was that type of metronomic performance where he's picking any type of pass. He's doing quick ones. And that was like, obviously, for the first goal, he was just on the edge of the final third, passing it around quickly for what was a really nice, well-worked goal. But then he was lofting some out to the wings with penetration and purpose. That thing he did in the Champions League final, where he's cutting out players with passes. We saw a few of them where he just quickly turned and put a vertical ball up and cut out the midfield of Chelsea, basically. And for him to be doing all this within minutes of making his debut, I thought was so impressive. It did remind me of those first few games Alonso played. I think who was it, West Brom or Norwich at home? I can't remember, but I remember being on the cop and just pairing at what you were seeing in front of you. And I think we'll say this a few times if Liverpool keep this up, but obviously a shame that fans weren't there to see him. But everyone watching on telly, I think they've seen the seeds of a player who could be hugely significant for the Reds this season and beyond.
Yeah, it certainly does look like that could be the case. Well, second half of the pod, we're going to talk transfers, and we best get straight into one that at the time of recording seems to be somewhat of a developing and breaking story, Gorsty, and that's Liverpool's Rhian Brewster. Crystal Palace have today been supposedly putting in a formal £19 million plus £6 million in add-ons bid from Crystal Palace. But whilst we're recording, I see that the Crystal Palace owner, Steve Parish, has come out and said that it's a total fabrication.
Yeah, all very, very strange. We just before we come on this pod, I spoke to someone at the club who was actually checking it out. So we were in the process of checking that out, and then was told that that was the case, that a bid had been made. So Steve Parish has obviously come out now and called it a total fabrication from, I think it was Sky Sports who initially published the story. So it's a very interesting one. But Liverpool are open to offers for Rhian Brewster. I think we wrote that at some point this month. Liverpool have been inundated with contact from, I think it's 10 clubs, a minimum of 10 clubs, the 3 relegated teams from last season and 7 in the Premier League. And before the Community Shield last month, it was Sheffield United who looked to be in the driving seat, and they were pushing more than anyone else. But now it looks as though it's possibly Crystal Palace. There was a talk of a 37 million buyback in an offer of 25 million with 19 with 5 add-ons. Or 6 add-ons, sorry. So that was our understanding. So now Steve Parish has obviously come out and he's saying that what Sky have reported just before we come on air is not true. So interesting situation developing, and as you say, very much breaking as we're recording and we're talking. And
Yeah, it is. I think we lost Gorsty there for a moment. Hopefully he will return with us. Joe, it's one of those where straight off the sort of top of the head and looking at it, for any club who may be interested in Rhian Brewster, chance to pay £19 million and make an £18 million profit if those add-ons obviously aren't met. It sort of seems to be a bit of an easy win for a club to develop Rhian Brewster on Liverpool's behalf, and then Liverpool buy him back for pretty much double the money.
Yeah, I suppose that's why it might be a difficult one to sort of everyone to agree on, because let's say if that bid was around the price that Liverpool wanted, well, 25 million, Liverpool get him back for £10 million more than what they received for him. It's not a lot in terms of English players in today's market. If Brewster goes on and scores 15, 20 goals, well, this price tag would be 50 million minimum, wouldn't it? If you look at other players like Jadon Sancho, or we're talking about £100 million player. So, been an interesting one. Brewster wasn't even included in the squad yesterday, and I think that tells you why Liverpool are open to offers for him. And I think they're clever enough to know that they could sell him, get the money in now, and put a buyback clause in there, and that's pretty much as good as a loan, isn't it? Really, in terms of if they really want him back, and he'd have to be very, very good to come back to Liverpool, because Liverpool have got such good options. You don't get back to Liverpool, do you, if you're a sort of top 10 player? You have to be very, very elite. So, I think it'd be a good chance for him to move on, and it seems like there's a lot of clubs interested, but I think those finer details of a deal will make it quite difficult, and that's why there's probably a lot of interest, but Liverpool haven't had something that is deemed acceptable yet. So it'd be interesting to see what happens next. It all seems very confusing. I don't know whether there's a bit of brinkmanship being played on Palace's behalf or elsewhere, but I suppose we'll see what happens. But I think Brewster will be departing Liverpool before the deadline anyway.
Yeah, the buyback seems to be quite a crucial element of this, Sean. I think a lot of Chelsea fans seeing Tariq Lamptey for Brighton and thinking, why wasn't there a buyback clause in that? But I suppose Liverpool probably don't want to have maybe a similar situation to what's happened with Danny Ings. Of course, he went on that loan with the obligation to buy for £20 million. No buyback clause in that deal. But Rhian Brewster, obviously a younger player, Liverpool seem to be keen on that, and rightly so.
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say I'd be a bit gutted if he leaves, because I really, really like him. I think last season on loan in the Championship, he showed what he was all about, scored the goals that we all knew he could score at a high level, and proved he's ready for a go in the Premier League. But yeah, he's not the player Liverpool need right now. I think that's a fact. I think there's so much to like about him, though. His mental strength, recovering from those injuries that could have really hampered him in his late teens. He's clearly a striker who deserves the crack at the highest level, and hopefully, we've heard of interest from several Premier League clubs, and we'll follow this story now with Palace's interest. But hopefully, it will ultimately present him with an opportunity to have a go in the top flight. But yeah, I think you look at Liverpool's situation now. I think even Diogo Jota has changed things a little bit, because I think we'll see this season lots of different mixtures of forward lines. I think Liverpool have now got different options on the left, different options on the right. You can play. Obviously, Firmino is the main man up front, but Minamino's had to go there, hasn't he? And we'd like to see a bit more of that. Salah and Mane can play centrally, and all of these guys are ahead of Brewster in the pecking order. There's just no doubt about that. But I do think the way Liverpool are looking to develop, like we were saying before about Thiago, and as they exert more and more control over games, you could maybe eventually be looking to try a player who's more of an out-and-out goal scorer. But that time is obviously much further down the line, and quite speculative if Liverpool do even kind of go that way in their development. But yeah, I suppose ultimately I draw a bit of a parallel with Hoover. It's quite a similar thing. They're 18 and 20. I think the pair of them, clearly good young players, as the 13 million that Liverpool are going to get for Hoover and the figures being touted for Brewster's show. But it's so hard, isn't it, that Liverpool are playing at the absolute highest level. There isn't really much margin for error, and therefore there isn't much margin for blood in youngsters in the Premier League when you've got to hit these really high standards to keep ahead of Man City, as we've seen over the last couple of seasons. It's a titanic battle, and a youngster coming in for 5 or 6 games to see what they're like. If it doesn't work, then that could be a season scuppered potentially in the league. So, it feels like the right move. And ultimately, I suppose you have to say as well, if the figures touted are right and it comes to a fee in the region of 25 million, well, it's not exactly like this, but you're essentially looking at Thiago in, Brewster out, a proven winner who's clearly going to enhance the squad and a player with vast potential, but it's still potential going out the other way. And as you say, if this buyback clause is in place, then it does feel like the best of both worlds for Liverpool.
Yeah, interesting stuff. We'll keep an eye on that. Do keep across the Liverpool Echo as ever for the latest developments on Rhian Brewster, maybe or maybe not going to Crystal Palace. Let's move on to the deals that Liverpool have done. We've seen Thiago Alcantara. We've said our piece on him, but Diogo Jota arriving over the course of the weekend as well. Gorst, he got this one late on Friday after we'd been doing the podcast. It seemed to be something that was happening whilst we were recording that podcast, but this one seems to sort of have the Michael Edwards, Jurgen Klopp trademark all over it. Very
much so, yeah. It was actually, I think it might have even been during the podcast, wasn't it, that the Jota news started to come thick and fast, and then we had the big news on the Friday night, and then Liverpool confirmed it on Saturday. Very good player, actually. I mean, I tend to watch Wolves quite a lot. I think I kind of like the way they set up and the way they attack, and I'm a big fan of Nuno, so I myself watching him a lot, and I've always been impressed with Jota, actually. I like that front three as a whole, actually, Adama Traore and Raul Jimenez, and obviously Keanu Hoover's gone the other way, so it's a deal that seems to suit both parties. 23, can play across a number of positions, and I think he's an ideal player in terms of someone who can play in a number of positions and come in whenever one of those front three are out, and the drop off in quality isn't too stark, because that's been Liverpool's problem, hasn't it, for a good number of years now. Whenever Salah, Mane or Firmino are out, then the players coming in not kind of anywhere near the same standard. So he's someone who will address that. Klopp's a massive fan of his work rate and his ability to play across that front three, and Liverpool have tracked him for a number of years. I think one thing that was kind of hammered home to me was how influential Pep Lijnders was in this deal, because he spoke to his contacts at Porto, where Jota came through early on in his career, and got a number of glowing character references about him, and Liverpool are quite keen on doing their homework recruitment-wise in terms of what's the actual player like as a person. It's no coincidence that pretty much every player they've signed for the past 3 or 4 years has been a success. It's because it's all about how much do they want to come here to succeed, how much hunger is in them to reach the top, and it does seem that Jota ticks quite a lot of boxes. I must admit, I think the price was a little bit higher than what I might have initially thought for him, if you'd have asked me 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago. But I suppose with Keanu Hoover heading the other way, that kind of tallies up to what most people or some people would have had in their head in terms of his value. But he's someone who's going to be an important player going forward.
Yeah, we've used the sort of phrase transformational signing for a number of players that Edwards and Klopp have brought in, Joe, but I do get the feeling that Diogo Jota can be a transformational signing for Liverpool, not if it's only for what he can go on and do in his own career, but also the role that he could allow the likes of Sadio Mane or Mohamed Salah to play in the formation, maybe going through the middle, as Gorst says, without much of a drop-off for the player coming in.
That's it. I mean, I think, of all the signings Liverpool are making this summer, they seem to be giving Liverpool so many different options in terms of, we talked about Thiago and Fabinho, where the positions that those players can now take up, the different formations Liverpool can take. So, Jota's an interesting one. And what one of my initial things that I thought about it was that, Liverpool often linked with Traore, weren't they? And, he's often linked with some of the big clubs. And I thought Jota was the one that always made more sense because of his versatility and the fact that he is someone that fits into Liverpool's mould. He worked very, very hard. He's, can play in a lot of different positions. And Traore was almost, it felt like a bit of a lazy link in the sense that he was just an out-and-out winger. And whilst he's very exciting and looks good on highlight reels, I think Jota just gives you so much more, apart from that. I must admit, I don't know that much about Jota. I've seen a bit of him for Wolves, but just highlights and stuff like that. He seems to be in and out the team a little bit last season, and I know he played a big part in the Championship promotion, and then in the first season back. But yeah, I didn't see a great deal of him last season, but sort of tried to read up a lot about him over the weekend, and he seems like one of the ones that Wolves fans were very fond of. So it sounds an exciting one. I can't wait to see what he's like for Liverpool. I think we've talked before about Origi and his time sort of just being on the wane a little bit, and I think a new player with fresh enthusiasm and just get the fans excited and give the players something different. So this is the one sign of the summer that I really thought they needed, a different option to go alongside the front three. And, and he gives it, doesn't he? So, yeah, can't wait to see what he does, really. As I say, as Gorst mentioned, the price sort of took me by surprise, but I think that says a lot about what Liverpool think of him. Liverpool wouldn't pay that sort of money if they didn't believe that he was going to be a really good addition. So, I'm quite excited about him. And one of the other things I noticed, the Analysing Anfield lads, Dave and Josh, that spoke about him earlier this summer, and I remember putting a piece up that he posted very, very similar numbers to Mane in his final season with Southampton. So, it's the sort of player that we've seen Liverpool do it so many times before, take a player who's, at a certain level, playing well in the Premier League and transform them into, a scary, scary player. So if they can do anything similar with Jota, then that's a very good prospect indeed.
Yeah, Sean, of the 3 deals of the summer then, is this maybe the most exciting one for what could happen? Thiago's obviously got great pedigree, but what Jota could potentially come at Anfield?
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. Obviously, he's young, isn't he? He's in his early 20s, and he is one for the future. It's a signing, I suppose, that does potentially look beyond the current front three, and maybe he'll be an incumbent of the next front three, the next iteration of Klopp's team. But I think they're all exciting. I think they're all connected as well in a certain way. I think you look at Klopp at Liverpool, and we're coming up to the 5-year anniversary, aren't we, of him being here? But he arrived with that heavy metal football tag, and clearly that was what everyone was used to and what we were expecting. It's what we saw in the first couple of seasons. But I think there's so many ways in which he's adapted his thoughts around the game, and how you can win a football match, how to build the team in the best possible way. And now we're seeing a Liverpool team that does exert a lot more control. But one way in which he's had to adapt this summer is just having a bigger squad, because he said a few times about how hectic the season's going to be, how congested it is with the pandemic and what that's wrought on football. So therefore, it does seem like a manager who's always liked the smaller squad for a lot of reasons, for harmony and just being able to give players minutes and be honest with them about how much they'll play. He's maybe compromised a little bit. He's happy to see a few extra players in the squad, but I also think it brings the kind of secondary bonus of, if there's any way of eking out a bit of improvement of this Liverpool team, like we've said on this pod and countless ones, they're an elite side. They're winners, aren't they? They've won a lot over the last couple of seasons. Well, maybe it's competition for places, and I think Tsimikas obviously gives that to Robertson in quite a direct way. Thiago is a fella who's going to come in and think, he's probably going to think he's the first name on the team sheet in midfield, and I think in a couple of months' time, maybe he'll have every right to think so once he's settled in. If hopefully he does so quickly. But Jota as well, he's a proven Premier League quality player. And whilst I've said he is one for the future, that is true. But right now it puts fairly direct pressure on that front three. And, you can't really see much room for improvement in them. But maybe it's as simple as giving them a breather every now and then, because that's one thing that they certainly haven't had in recent seasons. They've looked pretty indestructible. I think Liverpool have maybe been a touch lucky with injuries in the front three, but availability has been one of their big qualities. But yeah, now he can give them a bit of a rest and bring in a player who's hopefully got even more in his locker and got a higher ceiling and can improve at Liverpool.
Yeah, very exciting to see how that front three does line up, whether Diogo Jota is in it or not. One last area, Gorsty, that Liverpool fans want to see strengthened still is that central defensive area. We said before that it might be a case of fix and make do with Fabinho for this season, and maybe then go in for Ben White next summer. Another player who next summer might be available that sort of sprung into my mind, who has a release clause that activates next summer, is a certain Frenchman who plays at centre-half for RB Leipzig. I know a lot of Liverpool fans would love to see someone like Dayot Upamecano alongside Virgil van Dijk in defence, but it feels as though that defensive role is probably going to have to wait to be strengthened, isn't it? You're on mute, Gorsty.
You mentioned Upamecano there. I mean, what kind of prices are you going to be available at? So when was it, a couple of weeks back maybe, that there was kind of an acceptance that Liverpool were planning for the season with the options that they had at centre-back. But it was stressed that it's a unique and fluid market, so things can change. So I took to mean that Liverpool was still kind of monitoring things as they develop over the next coming weeks. So maybe that is still the case, but seems to be a line from whoever you speak to now at the club that the business is done and Liverpool are happy to kind of crack on with the players that they brought in. As I mentioned earlier on, I still think that could be a little bit of a mistake in terms of the lack of centre-backs who they've got, but that does seem to be, at the moment, what Klopp wants. So looks like it's going to be Gomez, Matip and Van Dijk, with Fabinho filling in as and when. So I think they're leaving themselves short, but that does seem to be what is happening at the moment.
Joe, what do you make of it, the central defensive area, and how keen would you be to see Liverpool strengthen it this summer, or do you think they are better off waiting to see potentially what's about next summer and if they'd have maybe more money to spend on that area?
Yeah, as I said before, I think it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, we've talked about like a Clavan-like signing. We've said that a few times, that you can go out and get someone for 5 to 10 million who can do a job and be your fourth choice. But I suppose that is very, very much easier said than done, isn't it? Clavan was good for the money they paid for him, but how many players like that are out there, I don't know. And then I suspect that the Klopp has looked a lot at Fabinho in training, looked at his midfield options, and just decided that Fabinho can do a job for a season, and Liverpool have enough. So, again, time will tell if that's a mistake. But Liverpool never rush into things. That's something that we've learned time and again the past 5 or 6 years or so, is that they don't go out. We saw it probably most famously at left back with Milner, and him playing left back the entire season. And how many times that summer before that season did we talk about Liverpool need a left back? They need a left back. They refused to do it. They played Milner there. It worked well enough, and then they waited and then found the left back in Andy Robertson that was, is going to be the left back for the next however many years. One of the best left backs, if not the best left back on the planet. So Liverpool don't rush into things, and they won't rush this just because there's a perceived potential weakness there. And I think chances are they'll get through it because they've been proven right in the past. So personally, I think they'll be okay. Time will tell, of course, and that might look silly if everyone gets injured and they are really struggling at the back. But I think we've got to trust in the powers that be at Liverpool to get these things right. So I think they'll be okay. And I think if Klopp thinks Fabinho can play there, then we should trust him and watch. And Fabinho will probably be brilliant. And yeah, because he's done it before and he'll do it again.
I suppose also, Sean, it's a full season of trust being put in the likes of Joel Matip and Joe Gomez to maybe get fit and stay fit, because then Liverpool wouldn't need potentially another world-class option there at centre-half. But just had a look, and reports going around that Upamecano's release clause next summer would be as little as £37 million. So that would be a mouth-watering proposition, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've written before, we know that Liverpool plan a couple of windows ahead, so perhaps centre-back will be something they look at next season. I think as well, it's an important point to say that quite often fans and even some of us guys you can look at the club, and I think over the last few years under Klopp, there's been times where you thought they're taking a transfer gamble here, thinking they can get through to January or maybe next summer without whatever position. Well, I think previously it has been centre-back as well before. And usually it does turn out that Klopp and his staff are holding all the aces and they get it right. So I do think there has to be trust in that respect. But the thing that clouds this situation with me is the injury worries, and not necessarily about the players and whether they're injury prone or not, but there's just so many games. It's going to be so thick and fast that I think little muscle niggles and tweaks, it's almost inevitable that stuff like that's going to happen. So is even 4 enough? And I think, with Kiana Hoover going, Sepp van den Berg perhaps not quite being ready. Klopp's talked, he actually mentioned Billy Cometio before the game at the weekend when he was talking about his centre-back option. So wonder if that little kind of slip perhaps is maybe indicative of him potentially playing a bit more of a role. But it could even be a bit of a shame if they don't get another centre-back, because just been thinking like today about the team we could maybe see on Thursday night in the Carabao against Lincoln. And pretty much the midfield and the attack, there's some great players there. I think it's a team that, left to its own devices, without the first team in it, could even win that competition. But then you're already thinking, well, who's playing at the back? I genuinely at this point couldn't tell you which two centre halves are going to play in that game. It'll be really interesting to see. But yeah, I think I quite like the idea of an older head coming in and maybe playing in those games, seeing a younger team through in competitions, being on the bench in the Premier League and being there if needed. Appreciate what the guys are saying. It is much easier said than done to say just go out and sign an experienced centre half. It's not that easy. But I think a small investment with a bit of smart recruitment could pay big dividends if they can get it done.
And before we go, it'd be remiss not to ask Joe Rimmer about the League Cup. Lincoln City to come on Thursday. The road to Wembley starts here, Joe.
It's got many names. Yeah, it's got many names, the League Cup, but it's quite widely known as the greatest cup competition on planet Earth, isn't it? So, it's there, and hopefully Liverpool win it for a record. What, 8th time, 9th time? God, I'm forgetting. But I love this competition. It's great. Going to play Lincoln. They're going to play a random team. I love it. What's not to be excited about? And no one is going to throw annoying FA Cup cliches at us. We can just enjoy the game without all that nonsense. So, cannot wait. But who is going to play in that game?
I agree with you, to be honest, Joe. I think they're all night games. We all see players who we don't really see very often, and there's always at least one or two absolutely mental scorelines. So I'm a big fan of the League Cup myself.
Liverpool 5, Arsenal 5 last year. It was bloody brilliant. Yeah. It was
hopefully there's no giant killing at Sincilbank for one of those FA Cup cliches for you, Joe. But anyway, it would probably be well out if we did try and guess a team lineup for the game at Sincilbank on Thursday, as well as we would a match prediction with maybe not knowing who would line up. So that's it for us for this edition of the Blood Red podcast. Do stick across the Liverpool Echo. Also, you can find the link to the Twice Daily newsletter in the description of this podcast. Do leave your email address and you'll get the top Liverpool stories directly to your inbox, as well as plenty of content coming up across the Blood Red channel, whether that's audio on demand or our dedicated YouTube channel. Do stick across all of that. But from myself, Guy Clarke, Joe Rimmer, Paul Gorst and Sean Bradbury, thanks for your time and your company. It's bye for now.